So, think about this for a second. What happens when the very people who are sworn to protect you just don't? When a known violent criminal is set free and attacks again, who's really to blame? I mean, can the state actually be held responsible for a crime it failed to prevent? Well, that exact question is at the heart of a landmark South African case that literally changed everything. And that's what we're going to break down.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the vicious attack that started it all. Then, we'll look at the warning signs, the predictable danger that was just completely ignored. We'll talk about the legal brick wall the victim hit and how the Constitution, well, how it just smashed right through it, creating this brand new duty to protect. And finally, we'll wrap up with why this one single case still matters so much today. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're going back to August 6th, 1995, in a small, quiet coastal village called Notsi. And what happened on this day? Well, it would end up kicking off a massive shift in South African law.
This is where a woman named Alex Carmichele was at her friend's house when she was just brutally assaulted by a man named Francois Coetzee. The court's description of the attack, it's graphic, and you can see it right there. It's tough to read, but it's really important to understand just how violent this was. Because here's the kicker. This was not some random act of violence. It was tragically, and I mean tragically, preventable. The most shocking part of this whole thing isn't just the attack itself. It's that the attacker, Coetzee, wasn't some stranger who came out of nowhere. No, he was a known threat, a predictable danger. Let's actually walk through the timeline, because it's a laundry list of ignored warnings and missed chances. Okay, look at this. The pattern of escalation is it's chilling. In '94, he gets a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence for indecent assault. Just a few months later, he tries to rape and murder a 17-year-old. And then, and this is the part that's just unbelievable, just 2 days after that attack, the police recommend he be released. And the magistrate says, sure. They had him in custody, and they just let him go.
So you can imagine the community was absolutely terrified. Alex Carmichael's friend, Julie Gosling, she didn't just sit back. She went straight to the senior prosecutor after Coetzee was let out. And she gave a direct, crystal clear warning. She basically said, I think he's going to do this again. It was a desperate plea for help, right to the people whose job it was to give it. And the response to that plea? What did she get back? Well, according to Gosling, the prosecutor pretty much shrugged her shoulders and said her hands were tied, that there was nothing she could do unless Coetzee went out and committed another crime. That claim right there, that the state's hands were tied, was about to be tested in the biggest way possible. So, after this horrific attack, Alex Carmichael did something pretty revolutionary. She decided to sue the state for negligence. But she slammed right into a legal brick wall, a big one. And it was a relic of the old pre-constitutional way of thinking. Her whole case was built on this legal idea called delict. Now, you can basically think of it as the South African version of a tort or a civil wrong. When you sue someone for damages because of something they did, or in this case, something they failed to do. So to win her case, she had to prove 3 key things. 1, did the authorities actually have a legal duty to protect her? 2, did they screw up and breach that duty? And 3, did that failure directly cause her injuries? But here's the thing, her entire case crumbled at the very first step, duty. And here's the absolute heart of the problem. Both the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeals said the same thing. Under the law as it stood, the state didn't have a specific legal duty to protect one person from another person's crime. Sure, they have a general duty to fight crime, but the court said that wasn't something a regular person like Alex Carmichael could actually sue them for. Case closed. Or so they thought. But her fight was far from over. Because right as her case was hitting this dead end, this incredibly powerful new force was rising in South Africa, the post-apartheid constitution. So, facing this massive legal brick wall, with 2 of the highest courts in the land ruling against her, was there any hope left? Was this really the end of the road? The answer, as it turns out, was a resounding no. And it was all because of South Africa's brand new constitution, a document that was designed from the ground up to completely change the relationship between the government and its people. This little clause right here, Section 39(2), This was the golden key that unlocked the whole thing. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a command. It basically forced the courts to look at the old laws and ask a really uncomfortable question. Does this old rule, the one that says the state has no duty to protect, does it actually line up with our new constitutional values? Things like the right to life, dignity, and personal safety? And the Constitutional Court took that command very, very seriously. Which brings us to the final and honestly the most revolutionary part of this story: the complete redefinition of the state's responsibility to its people. What the court did here was a fundamental shift, a total 180. Before, the law based this idea of duty on these really vague concepts like society's notions of justice. The Constitutional Court just wiped that off the table. It said, nope, the duty doesn't come from some fuzzy notion. It comes directly from the state's obligation in the Bill of Rights. This was a huge deal. It was a move from just hoping for safety to having an active, legally enforceable duty to protect. So, the court's final decision was to send the case back for a full trial, which essentially threw out the previous rulings. But the real impact, the reason we're talking about this today, wasn't just what it meant for Alice Carmichele. It was about the massive legal legacy it created for every single South African. I mean, the Carmichael legacy is just immense. First off, it said the Constitution isn't just some dusty document, it's a living, breathing value system that has to shape every other law. It created a clear, positive duty for the state to protect people from violence, especially women. It confirmed that yes, police and prosecutors can be held accountable when they're negligent. And it totally rejected this idea that the state could just hide behind some kind of public interest immunity when it fails to do its most basic job. And this really brings us to the big takeaway here. The Carmichael case was so much more than one woman's incredibly heroic fight. It was about taking a promise of safety written in the Constitution and turning it into something real, something you can actually enforce. It means the state can never again just say, our hands are tied. And it leaves us with this powerful, ongoing question: now that we know this duty exists, where does that responsibility truly begin and where does it end?